Here we go, more triggers than a Smith & Wesson factory. So this is one that I first presented in March of this year at the Questioning Science Conference. Great event, Gloria Moss organises that one. Anyone familiar with questioning?
Yeah.
A few of you? Yeah. Gloria Moss was a professor in the world of academia, and she's that rarest of entities. She's someone from that kind of background who was willing to question everything that she'd been taught over decades. And she realised that she'd been lied to on a monumental scale, you don't say. And so, quite bravely, she decided to start again with a blank sheet of paper and redraw her entire worldview, casting aside everything that she'd been taught in academia. And she's now asking questions about, Tartaria, mud floods, lost civilizations, and all sorts. She's down about 5,000 different rabbit holes. So I get challenged whenever I do one of these questioning events to come up with some different subjects that I've not spoken about previously. And for this one, I decided to hone in on the idea of astrotheology in the Bible, specifically the New Testament. So the Old and New Testaments of the Bible do appear to be quite different from each other, particularly in terms of how the figure of God is represented. So the God of the Old Testament appears to be, how can I put it? A psychopath. Psychopathic, jealous, insecure, genocidal, loves killing people, loves plagues, loves floods, loves punishing people, tormenting, torturing them. So by the time we get to the New Testament, he's completely undergone a personality transplant. Maybe he's bipolar. But, in the New Testament, he loves us all so much that he becomes flesh and comes down to earth and suffers terribly in order to save us all from our terrible sins. So, quite the personality change. So it seems to be forces of good battling forces of evil. The God of the Old Testament is commonly expressed as Yahweh, although some feel that when you get into the Gnostic tradition, it's the idea of the demiurge, this lesser God, which presides over this realm, but is not the original God of creation. It's an entity which somehow was able to create this realm in which we find ourselves. That's another story. I'll leave that for another day, but I found this very interesting. Somebody totted up the kill count of God, Yahweh, in the Old Testament versus Satan, the bad guy. You want to see it?
Yeah.
God, 2,476,633. Satan, the bad guy, 10. And some of those were by accident. So it does raise a few questions about the true nature of the entity presented to us as God in the Old Testament. But this presentation is specifically focused on the New Testament and the figure of Jesus Christ. And I'm arguing that Jesus, as he appears in the New Testament, is entirely representative, symbolically, of the Son. It's the Son of God. Not S-O-N, but S-U-N. It's solar worship going back a very long time, ancient civilizations, which found itself woven into the teachings of the New Testament. It also ties into the zodiacal ages and the constellations, the 12 signs of the zodiac, and the different key points of the year, the solstices, the equinoxes, and the midpoints between them. So equinox is equal night and day. That's what the word breaks down as from the Latin. So we get that twice a year in the Northern Hemisphere, what we refer to as in March and September. And then solstice means simply the sun standing still as it's viewed from its perspective on the horizon. So it's seen at 2 points of the year, June and December, to effectively stand still for 3 days. These are the midpoints between the equinoxes and the solstices. They are important, or they were to ancient pagan civilizations. So we have May 1st, which is Walpurgisnacht, the night of 30th of April, going into Beltane in Celtic traditions. this represents fertility, the emergence of life, and an offering of sacrifice of some kind to ensure a bountiful harvest. This is why the dark occultists of this world observe a 40-day season of sacrifice, which begins at the time of the spring equinox, 21st, 22nd of March, and runs all the way through to 1st of May. They do, unfortunately, rule all aspects of organised society. On August the 1st, we have Lammas, representing the time of gratitude and pre-harvest thankfulness. Then 31st of October, going into the 1st of November, Sawan, expressed these days as Halloween. So originally, this was a time preserved for venerating ancestors and remembering the dead. These days, it's been turned into what David Icke refers to as Satanism light. So it's a celebration of death and decay, and it's just become this ghoulish carnival, which is horrific. Then, round about 1st or 2nd of February, we have Candlemas, representing prediction, a time of looking forward, planning for the future, specifically the spring, and this is also expressed as Groundhog Day in American traditions. So the Bible, according to some researchers, can be viewed as an astrotheological literary hybrid, observing those times of the year and the movement of the sun through them. Astrotheology meaning simply astro, the study of stars, basically, and theology, the study of the nature of God. So it's God being expressed as stars, or specifically in this case, the sun. There is a reason why in pretty much every classic depiction of the figure of Jesus, he appears with a halo behind his head, illuminated, and also a cross, because these are the 4 cardinal points of the solar cross through which the sun travels throughout the solar year. So when Jesus was said to have died on the cross, this is a reference to the Southern Cross, which is the lowest point in the sky at which the sun is seen to set at the time of the winter solstice, as viewed from what we refer to as the Northern Hemisphere. So it's the journey of the sun through these important times of the year. I've got a lot of this information from the first Zeitgeist movie. Anyone seen this? Yeah. A few? And I got put onto this by Danny Rampling, the famous DJ. So I was stranded in an airport lounge in Riga, Latvia one time when I'd been playing a gig with Danny Rampling and some other DJs, and our Ryanair flight, because it's all glitz and glamour, in the world of DJing, Danny Rampling was flying Ryanair, and our flight back to Stansted was grounded, and we were stuck in Riga for 24 hours. So I got chatting with Danny, and he said, there's this amazing new documentary film that you've got to see. It's called Zeitgeist. And I said, well, what is it? He said, well, look it up when you get home. And I did, and it completely changed my world. So this movie, created by Peter Joseph, talks about this symbolic concept of light versus dark, and the sun doing battle with its enemy. In the Egyptian tradition, Horus was a representation of the sun, and Set, his uncle, was Satan, the bad guy. This is duality again. It's light doing battle with darkness, or good versus evil. And it's just an insight into how the ancients viewed the sun and its life-giving properties. And they worshipped it because without the sun, there can be no life. So they would welcome the return of the sun every morning at sunrise, and the night, with all the darkness that it brought, was symbolic to them of death. So they created these figures like Horus and Set as symbolic representations of that process. So here's one of a couple of excerpts from Zeitgeist, which goes into this concept a bit further.
Broadly speaking, the story of Horus is as follows. Horus was born on December 25th of the Virgin Isis Mary. His birth was accompanied by a star in the east, and upon his birth he was adored by 3 kings. At the age of 12, he was a prodigal child teacher, and at the age of 30, he was baptized by a figure known as Anup, and thus began his ministry. Horus had 12 disciples he traveled about with, performing miracles such as healing the sick and walking on water. Horus was known by many gestural names such as the Truth, the Light, God's Anointed Son, the Good Shepherd, the Lamb of God, and many others. After being betrayed by Typhon, Horus was crucified, buried for 3 days, and thus resurrected.
And Horus, it turns out, is not the only one. Because when we go into many other traditions from many other parts of the world, in many other time frames, we find some very familiar trends starting to emerge. So Attis out of Greece, born of a virgin, born on December 25th, crucified, died for 3 days, and was resurrected. Dionysus, also out of Greece, born of a virgin, December 25th, performed miracles, was known as the King of Kings, the Alpha and Omega, and was resurrected. Out of Persia, Mithra, some familiar elements there, resurrected. Sunday was the day of worship for this entity. Krishna, out of India, same thing, born of a virgin, star in the east, performed miracles, resurrected. And then later, after all these traditions, the figure of Jesus Christ was invented by the Roman Empire, according to many, to appease the communities that they wanted to take over by weaving in older traditions and older belief systems into this new way of presenting these ideas. So Jesus was said to have been born of a virgin, born on December 25th, star in the east, had 12 disciples, performed miracles, was dead for 3 days, and was resurrected. And the symbolism of Jesus dying for 3 days and then being reborn ties into the winter solstice, the time round about 21st, 22nd of December, when the sun is seen at its lowest point on the Southern Cross on the horizon, and it's seen to symbolically die for 3 days. So it doesn't move, it stays in the same position. And then on the morning of December 25th, sunrise, it starts to rise again very slowly. And it begins its gradual rise all the way up to its high point at the time of the the summer solstice. So it's all symbolic. And that's where we get the idea of Easter and Jesus being dead for 3 days in the tomb and then being resurrected. Another excerpt from Zeitgeist.
This is the sun. As far back as 10,000 BC, history is abundant with carvings and writings reflecting people's respect and adoration for this object. And it is simple to understand why, as every morning the sun would rise, bringing vision, warmth, and security, saving man from the cold, blind, predator-filled darkness of night. Without it, the cultures understood the crops would not grow and life on the planet would not survive. These realities made the sun the most adored object of all time. Likewise, they were also very aware of the stars. The tracking of the stars allowed them to recognize and anticipate events which occurred over long periods of time, such as eclipses and full moons. They in turn cataloged celestial groups into what we know today as constellations. This is the cross of the zodiac, one of the oldest conceptual images in human history. It reflects the sun as it figuratively passes through the 12 major constellations over the course of a year. It also reflects the 12 months of the year, the 4 seasons, and the solstices and equinoxes. The term zodiac relates to the fact that constellations were anthropomorphized, or personified, as figures or animals. In other words, the early civilizations did not just follow the sun and stars, they personified them with elaborate myths involving their movements and relationships. The sun, with its life-giving and saving qualities, was personified as a representative of the unseen creator or God, God's Son, the light of the world, the savior of humankind.
And that's why you're hard-pressed to find a classical depiction of the figure of Jesus without that solar cross behind his head, marking out the 4 seasons and, as we just heard, the journey of the sun through its solar year. The zodiacal wheel, and we find that on the roof of many churches as well. That's the reason it's there. That's what it's symbolizing. And there are many clues in biblical verses as to the New Testament being all about the sun in the sky. John 3:13, but he that came down from heaven, even the Son which is in heaven, S-U-N. 2 Corinthians 4:6, to give the light of knowledge to the glory of God, the light being the sun. Mark 13:26, they shall see the sun coming in the clouds. John 19:5, Then came forth Jesus wearing a crown of thorns. So the crown is the solar corona, sun's rays. That's what's being symbolised by the crown of thorns. John 9:5, as long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. Jesus was known as the light of the world, which is entirely in keeping with the sun. There's a group called Light of the World, a jazz funk band at Britain, so they seem to have named themselves after that concept, and they're still going. Jesus is said to have performed miracles like walking on water. Well, the sun can be symbolically seen to walk on water as it rises and sets across water. These days the sun is white. Don't know if you've noticed. I'd quite like to know why, because I always remember it as a golden orange or yellow. And I don't think I can remember many kids' drawings where they've drawn trees and a landscape and some kids playing and a white sun. It was always orange. So something has happened to the sun.
And the clouds. We had clouds, and we had real clouds as kids. We drew pictures of the yellow sun as clouds.
Real clouds, imagine that.
They changed
Amazing.
They changed it from a filament to LED light bulb. That's why.
Right. Well, there's all kinds of theories as to what's really gone on there, but that is one for another day, I guess. All right, more from Zeitgeist. Here we go.
The star in the east is Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, which, on December 24th, aligns with the three brightest stars in Orion's belt. These three bright stars in Orion's belt are called today what they were called in ancient times, the Three Kings. And the Three Kings and the brightest star, Sirius, all point to the place of the sunrise on December 25th. This is why the Three Kings follow the star in the east, in order to locate the sunrise, the birth of the sun. The Virgin Mary is the constellation Virgo, also known as Virgo the Virgin. Virgo in Latin means virgin. Virgo is also referred to as the house of bread, and the representation of Virgo is a virgin holding a sheaf of wheat. This house of bread and its symbol of wheat represents August and September, the time of harvest. In turn, Bethlehem, in fact, literally translates to house of bread. Bethlehem is thus a reference to the constellation Virgo, a place in the sky, not on earth.
All right.
The reality is...
That's another piece there. According to the American founding father Thomas Paine, the Christian religion is a parody on the worship of the sun, in which they put a man called Christ in the place of the sun and pay him the adoration originally paid to the sun. And a similar viewpoint comes from a little bit earlier on, 100 to 165 AD, Justin Martyr, who's supposed to have said, when we say that he, Jesus Christ, our teacher, was produced without sexual union, was crucified and died and rose again and ascended into heaven, we propound nothing different from what you believe regarding the sons of the god Jupiter. He was talking to Romans. It might be a bit bizarre to listen to a Christmas record at the beginning of September, but there's a great rapper who goes by the name of Beast 1333. And he put out a song a few years ago called A Christmas Story. And the lyrics go further into these ideas of where the figure of Jesus came from and how it's all solar worship and stuff. So if it's not too bizarre, let's have a listen to a Christmas song and we'll see what he's got to say.
They chose the winter solstice as the birth of Jesus Christ, the Savior, the Son of Man, the righteousness, the light. December 25th is not his real date of birth. Pagan holidays disguised, but they came first. The reason for establishing December 25th is simple, really pay attention as I explain it in the gist. The customs rooted in the celebration, all the gifts and fun are really rituals to celebrate the rebirth of the sun. 4,000 years ago, millennia, the two before Messiah. 25th was for the sun god, and festival of fire was the same for the Romans. Zoroastrianism, Mithra, when the days began to lengthen and the night shorten, etc. The New Testament, it never states the year that he was born. Sacred oaks for the Germanic people, trees take on new forms, adorn the evergreen, the representation of all fertility. Prince Pringle, supernatural gift given abilities. A poppycock, goodies left aside, a pagan bloody sock was prophesied in Malachi chapter 4 verse 2. He's a shop the sun. They always talk about the one that flies above us, not the one that came about as a product of two lovers. The emerging of belief started with Emperor Constantine. The Edict of Toleration in AD 313. Our favorite morbidly obese trespassers